Hello, everybody. Take it you can hear me okay? Actually, I can hear me okay. So I'm doing a talk on running featured events on Steam. So I'm Gary Birchall, and I've been in the games industry for about 1 million years. And in 2016, I decided to take the leap and go indie, and have been doing it ever since. So in 2018, we released our first game into early access, which has been paying the bills ever since. That left early access in 2019, and we've been working on Century ever since, and that's due next year. And I've hosted 2 featured events on Steam. I've consulted on quite a few others, and I've participated in as many as I can manage because they're very, very beneficial. So what we're going to cover today, excuse me, is what is a cross-publisher Steam event, why you want to be a part of them, what are the different levels of featuring you can receive, what impacts your chances of featuring, how do you set up events, so that's more the kind of logistical side, and what sort of results you can be expected, and we'll wrap up with some takeaways and Q&A at the end. So for those that don't know what a cross-publisher Steam event is, I'd be surprised if you hadn't come across them on Steam at some point, because they are ubiquitous. Up on screen there, we've got a selection of different ones there, from ones that Valve have hosted themselves, such as their monthly release recaps, through to their Going Rogue event, and we've got sort of Star Wars themed ones and stuff like that. And this screenshots here is taken from SteamDB, that has a very handy link that basically tracks every single one of these Steam events, and you can click on each one of those and they'll take you through to the actual page, which is fantastic for like looking at reference materials and things like that. You tend to have events falling into 3 categories. You have your regional events, so those might be based on cities, countries. You've got Quebec here. Themed ones around a certain, we saw on the previous page, there was a Star Wars one, Lord of the Rings, Ludo Naricon on screen here is one of the first I remember seeing and thinking, that's a really fantastic idea. And that's been going for years now. And so the theme for that is around narrative games. And then finally, you have publisher events. So those are all the games from a publisher that might be on Steam, or if a developer's got enough games to qualify for their own page, they'll have that for themselves as well. So regardless of what type of event it is, they all have the same set of requirements. You can't go off and do these on your own. Valve have to grant you the access to the tools for you to set up the page. And although it's very easy to add games to the page, you should get permission from the person who owns the game before you put it onto the page. And just like you can't buy positioning on Steam, you can't sell access to the page or anything like that. The page has to explain its purpose. So we've got a couple of examples on screen there. Abandoned Ship recently participated in the World Oceans Day sale, and that was hosted by Curve Games on behalf of the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Service. And so there's a bit of blurb describing why the event is happening. And in that case, because it was a charity, all of the developers were contributing some of their net profits to the charity. And of course, showing who's organising it is a requirement as well, which is why I've got hosted by Curve Games there. They've actually got their publisher capsule there for you to follow as well, which is obviously good SEO. And it's worth saying at this point that featuring is ultimately what you want to get for these events, because it does make the difference between a successful event and one that isn't. But it's not guaranteed. You should treat it as a gift rather than an expectation. So why do you want to be a part of Steam events? I'm sure we've all seen this terrifying graph about how many releases there are on Steam every year. And if this year this year's latter half continues at the same pace that the first half has gone, then this will be the most games on Steam released in a year. And of course, we're not just competing with all of the games that are releasing this year. We're competing with all the games that have been releasing every year and are now heavily discounted. So what I mean by that is that being an indie is really hard, and getting visibility for your game is incredibly hard. And I think regardless of what level of success you might have had, you might be struggling to make ends meet right the way through to mega successful. As creators, we all want our games to be in the hands of as many players that are going to like our games as possible. And events are a fantastic way of doing this, because they're on the platform where they're going to be buying and wishlisting and playing the game. So it's not like with social media where you have to hope that they convert from one platform to another. When they're on the event page, it's adding to cart is a single click away. So I think to sort of summarize the benefits of Steam events, it's just like Tony Montana said. First you get the featuring, then you get the visibility, and then you get the good revenue and wish lists. So what sort of different levels of featuring can you receive or hope to receive? So, there's a real possibility that you might get no featuring. That basically means that you are relying on your own marketing efforts to bring traffic to the page. You can do some things that help out, like you can have a banner for your event at the top of every participating game's Steam store page. And that will, if you've got some big hitters, that will naturally draw some traffic to your page as well. But yeah, featuring on the front page is really where the good stuff's at, which is where the daily deal capsule comes in. That's a small capsule that's on the front page for 24 hours. And then moving on from that, you've got the weekend deal and the midweek madness slots. Those are bigger capsules that are on the front page for a few days. And those are sort of, I think, the realistic best expectations you can have for featuring, because the level above that, where you have a full takeover, like the Steam Summer Sale is a full takeover, or a very top page banner, they're only reserved for like the best of the biggest, and so probably beyond what we can all hope to achieve. But you've also got the pop-up message as well, and that's the message that we all click through really quickly when Steam loads up for the first time. And that's completely independent of any featuring. So you can have no featuring but still receive, no front page featuring, still receive a pop-up. Or you can have like front page featuring and the pop-up as well. But really you want it all, because you want to maximize your event to as best it can be. So what impacts your chances of featuring? And I think first and foremost is the quality of the participating games. And when I say quality, what I actually mean in this sense is the number of user reviews those games have. So the more user reviews, the better, basically. Number of games matters as well. If you only had a couple of big hitters and not much else, that would impact things. I think really there's sort of a kind of unspoken of sweet spot in Valve, or the person at Valve that you're speaking to, which means that you will start getting featuring, and they don't publicize what that is. So it's up to you to kind of work out where that minimum sweet spot is. So you kind of want to make sure that you've got the kind of right number of big games as well as the right number of total games as well. And because essentially Valve are all about providing players with value, discounts form an important part of that as well. So while they're not mandatory, that all helps to kind of make the event feel like it's worth a feature, say. I think, having well-presented artwork for the page helps, and also a very strong justification for the page. That's important too. So the image on screen there is actually an example of an event that I'm aware of that did not receive any featuring. And I've got a few theories as to why that might be. So first up, the theme of Space Sail. It's a very, very broad theme. It's the sort of thing you could imagine Valve hosting themselves with, like, I imagine on Steam, there's probably a couple of hundred games that could apply to a space sale. So I think that's the main problem. There's some decent games in there for sure, but I think that sweet spot of big hitters and the number of games just wasn't achieved. There's 18 games, I think, so I don't think they quite hit that as well. I think there's a couple other things that detract from it ever so slightly. Personally, I find the artwork quite busy, hard to read. And also, I know that the organizer of the event, they put their game in like one of the most prominent positions on the page, and it didn't, objectively quite justify that positioning. And if I can see that, Valve can too, and it kind of just tarnishes sort of the reason for the event. So how do you set up events? So I think right off the bat, you want to have a compelling idea and a compelling reason for hosting your event. So the two events I've hosted are for the Guildford Games Festival. So Guildford residents tend not to know of the rich heritage of games in Guildford, let alone people beyond Guildford. I'm sure we do, as we're from the games industry, we're aware of that. But in 2019, there was the local cluster wanted to get together and organise a physical event. And it was really impressive, fantastic job by the committee. And then, of course, 2020 and the pandemic happened. All events shifted to digital. And I think for me, seeing what was achieved with like a really professional event, a physical event, the goal of shifting it to digital, and that was basically going to manifest as just lots of video content of interviews with local developers and things like that, broadcast on Twitch. And I was seeing this sort of advent at the time of this relatively new event page stuff going on Steam. And I thought there's a really good way to marry those two up. So I approached the committee and talked about my idea, and my goals for it were primarily to kind of take this really great content that they were going to make and kind of escalate that into a worldwide audience. And, I knew that if this was successful and it received featuring, then it would provide a real tangible benefit to all of the participating games. And it's rare that you can have something like that sort of will translate to something as simple as money in the bank for people. So I really liked that aspect of it as well. And I knew that personally we'd benefit too. I knew Banded Ship would sell more copies and Century would get more wish lists. And the festival committee were, busy doing their own thing. They were kind of like, yeah, whatever, just run with it. We're happy to broadcast our stuff. I don't think they quite got Steam and what it could bring to the event, apart from one person who then sort of basically helped me corral all the developers, because doing these things is a lot of work. So I was pleased for the help, and to kind of have a bridge into the committee without actually being part of it. Yeah, that was our justification for the event, and the artwork was from the 2020 edition, and so we did it as a lot of local landmarks for Guildford, and we buried a bunch of sort of Guildford Games Easter eggs in the artwork as well. And we pointed this out to Valve because we thought, it's not a bad thing for them to be aware that we're giving this a lot of thought and care. And it's just cool. They're gamers too, so they like this stuff. But it's made me think, taking a random event like Develop, if we were to do a Steam event for that, what would that look like? And, we've got all of these fantastic talks that are going on, and from the previous years as well. So that's a great excuse. It's the perfect timing for a midweek madness slot on Steam. And in terms of games, every year you have the indie showcase. So there's some games there, and you can use previous ones and previous award winners from those. And they might not necessarily be the biggest games, but then you've got the Develop Star Awards, where they do tend to be bigger games. So, if not just for the nominees and winners this year, it's the winners from previous years and things like that. So I was actually yeah, I might go talk to someone about that because I think it's a something that could work. Once you know what you're doing for your event, it kind of makes the participation rules quite easy. So looking at Ludo and Narracon, for example, it's games that are, have a strong narrative element to them. For us, being region-based, it was simply a case of if your game was developed or co-developed in the GU postcode area, then you could be part of the page. And then once we decided that, it was just a case of going through, finding all the games from past and present that had a Steam presence and getting approvals for them. That's a lot of that's outside of your control because it's other people's properties. And when it's indie developers, you tend to get very quick answers because there's not much of a chain to go through. When you're getting to the realms of talking to like EA, then there's a long-winded process of getting to the person who can actually has the kind of the power to say yes without somebody else losing their job, and that's what can take a long time. So up on screen there is last year's Guildford Games Festival. So I think there was about between 60 and 70 games, and the way I set up the page, again, like looking at the one that didn't receive featuring, fairness was something that I wanted to make sure was kind of an overriding factor. And it just made sense to me to, people visiting this page, they're going to care about the most popular games first and foremost. So I split up the page by the number of user reviews those games had. So the really, really big hitters occupied the top slots that you see in the top left. And then moving down, you had the games that had, many, many thousands of user reviews. So after we got through the top sellers, the more great games made in Guildford section was for everybody else, really. So it was low thousands of user reviews and high hundreds of user reviews were in the next section, and then the hundreds of user reviews, and then below that for the others. And we had enough titles to kind of have a standalone VR section, which made sense because people were looking for, that to be separate from everything else. And then the games that are coming soon. So I just felt like it was important to make sure the page was easy to read, compartmentalized up, but fair as well. So every little subsection was randomized. So all of the games, say in the 3x4 of the top sellers, they'd be randomized. So you reload that page, they'd all be shuffled around. Nobody could then come to me and say, why is that game there and why not my game not there or whatever. So yeah, you have to approach Valve to get access to the page tools. Basically, hosting an event is like posting an event on your game on Steam. But this time in the back-end tools, you have a little sale tab, and that has everything for you to set up your page. So I won't go into the actual details of that setup because for the documentation on the partner site is actually really comprehensive. So I'd suggest just to read that rather than me regurgitate it here. But what I would say is broadcasting is a bit of a banana skin in that it's not a very intuitive process in that you want people to broadcast their games during the event onto their store page, and you want that to pipe through to the event page. But you have to have their accounts that are broadcasting their footage be friends with the account that is hosting the event for it to appear on the event. But you've got ways to set up, we want to make sure the festival content always appeared front and center. And then the other games footage would basically be beneath that, but it would be organized by whoever had the most views, basically. So yeah, creating the assets is obviously something that's going to depend on how detailed you go as to the length of time it takes. This was last year's Guildford Games Festival event, so we want to do something different. And again, just to increase our chances of getting featured again. So we went with an arcade theme, and all of the arcade games were themed around games that are participating on the page. And it was set in the Undercroft, which, unless you know Guildford High Street very well, is basically like a little dungeon thing. And again, we wanted little kind of cool nod to the heritage. So we had a little crane arm with like a bullfrog and lion head plushie and things like that. But setting up the page is actually reasonably straightforward. It's the permissions and getting access and things like that that tend to take the longest. And organising discounts, particularly since Valve changed their discounting rules in March as of this year, is slightly trickier. What you want to ask Valve for is basically them to set up something that is like an option. So for the Guildford Games Festival, that they then just choose and then add their discount, because you want to remove as many barriers for people as possible. And if you're going to be setting up custom discounts, then I'd have to go in and put in the date that matches the festival to then put the discount in. And it's better if Valve will do that for you. They used to, in some cases, provide exemptions from cooldown rules, but that ceased when they changed their rules to, I think the exemptions only apply now to the 4 seasonal discounts they run. So definitely approach Valve about featuring. You want to talk to them about this when you originally requesting access to the tools, because you want to get a sense of if there's a problem with the date, if there's a problem with your proposal, like the sort of games you're aiming to get, the number of games, things like that. You want to know about that now so you can try and rectify it. Valve are a black box, so they might not communicate why you might not get a feature very, very clearly, but you want to try your best. And then on the run up to the event, probably not 2 months before, that might be a bit too early. Certainly don't leave it later than a couple of weeks before. You want to lock in your featuring. Both Guildford Games Festivals so far, and hopefully the one we'll run this year, received about as good as I think we could hope to get, in that we had the weekend deal featuring and the pop-up messages as well. So what does this sort of thing bring you? So front page featuring, as anybody who's experienced it before, basically gives you very big numbers. The tools to see how well you've performed in a marketing sense isn't the same as the tools you have for your games. So those two capsules there are showing the events dashboard. And so the reads is basically the page visits. Now, I think these are floors rather than ceilings of numbers, because the first one got 1.7 million page visits. Last year's one got 1.4 million. But you look at the impressions on your for my game that was on halfway down the page, and it was like 4 million, and like the majority of that came from other pages, which is what the event page was. Even the broadcast information, that had 2.7 million for the first one. So I think actually that the numbers were higher, but regardless, it was still millions. We could not achieve that without front page featuring, being honest. And sort of, going back to my goals for the event, definitely they were met, in terms of taking what the festival content had generated. It got thousands of views on Twitch. It got millions of views on Steam. The kind of, you just run away with that Steam thing. Shifted the next year where it was like, well, actually, no, it's, actually Steam's where it's at. Every game that was on that page benefited in some way, shape or form. And I really liked, I think that the smallest game on there had like 50 user reviews, maybe not even that. And I really like the idea that they probably received more visibility during those events than they'd received any other time. I personally really liked that. But in order to sort of track it, maybe not too scientifically, because it involved me every 8 hours that the features were running, basically counting how many Guildford games were in the global top sellers charts. But the best that we did at any one moment during the 2020 event was 16 games made in Guildford were in the top 400. And Need for Speed Heat managed to reach 6th, which was the highest placement. And then last year we had 12 games in the top 300 at any one moment. and Gloomhaven managed to reach 13th in that. So, we know Guildford Games don't occupy those sorts of positions all the time anyway, so this event sort of made that happen. I could talk about my own games, obviously. I can't talk about the specifics of other people's games. But on the two graphs on the left were 2020, 2021 was on the right, where we did much better in terms of revenue for Abandoned Ship and wish lists for Sentry. And the charts show 1 week before and 1 week after. So you can see how much of a difference that spike makes. And here's some of the marketing data during so the events went live Thursday at 6, and then the featuring ended on Monday at 6. So on those days, across both years, these are the events. So with Abandoned Ship, it was about midway down the page and got 4 million impressions from that. So the pages that the games that are higher up the page would have obviously done a lot better than that. You can see the difference that page positioning makes when you look at Sentry, which is in the bottom section, in the coming soon section, where it was hundreds of thousands or just over 1 million rather than many millions. So I think there's some differences in the click-through rates. Obviously, I think with Abandoned Ship, that basically came down to in 2021 we had a greater discount. With Sentry in 2020, we had a super early page up on Steam, earlier than I'd be comfortable putting up usually, but I wanted to take advantage of the feature, which was definitely worth it. By 2021, we had more content on the page, the capture was better, and it clearly encouraged more clicks. But there's a significant difference between the impressions between 2020 and 2021 with Sentry. And I think that is down to something as simple as the page art. So we had a couple more games in 2021 than we did in 2020. Certainly not enough to make the page feel like it scrolled a lot longer than the year previously. But in 2020, where we had sort of like the nice scene with lots of Guildford landmarks, we had a nice vertical aspect to it as well. And I think that made the page feel shorter to scroll through, and it encouraged you to scroll down. In last year's, it was very horizontal, and it didn't sort of make you feel like you wanted to keep scrolling. That's, I won't know that for sure, but that's kind of my takeaway from that, which is silly, really, when you think how subtle that is. So, yeah, I think to wrap up, the things you should take away from this, if you're going to host your own events or participate in them, which is a lot easier because you generally just have to say yes and put in a discount. But bear in mind how difficult it is. So, make the organisers' lives easy. But yeah, certainly if you're hosting them, you've got to plan months and months in advance. With the first year, that took the longest, obviously, because the second year was much quicker to organise because we were retreading previous ground. In fact, in the second year, I wasn't going to do it. I thought this was a one-time thing, and it was the Steam Tabletop Fest. I don't even know if you remember that from last year. That it was a Valve-run event. I think it was Auroch Digital were involved in it as well. But anyway, I was scrolling through that, and there were so many games that had absolutely nothing to do with board games or anything. Not even where like you could squint and go, yeah, I can see the justification for that. And what it made me realise was that some people don't play by the same rules that I was playing by, and they were just doing anything they could to get featuring. And Valve haven't really, I think they're starting to now, but at that time, certainly, they weren't really sort of clamping down on that sort of thing or saying no to people. And it just made me go, you know what? Like, we have a legitimate event that was successful last year, and it's got great content, and we've got games that are, it's clearly good enough for a feature because we received one before. And even though we left it very, very close, I think it was like 2 months out, I just said to the guy who was helping me run it, Sam Reed, I was just like, shall we do it? Do you have it in you to scramble this? Because it will be a scramble. And, it worked, it paid off. But it made me realize that, I guess I had a bit of imposter syndrome, which is absurd thinking about it objectively, but I think it strikes us all at various times. But they certainly take a massive amount of time and organisation. But the results are certainly worth it. You should be talking over your goals with Valve, not least because they are the gatekeepers of providing you access to the tools, but also for achieving the ultimate goal, which is making sure you get your features. Touch base with them occasionally just to remind you that you exist and that like everything's still progressing to plan. And if you don't have someone at Valve that you can reach out to, I don't know if people have experienced what I have, where they seem to want you to move more to the ticketing system. There is a drop-down option in the ticketing system that is about more biz dev related matters that you can hit up and just ask. Whenever I've used that system, they've been very good at responding. And I have some, because we've done this before, I have now someone that I go to for this, which is how it used to work. And I personally prefer, but hey, here's what it is. Have really effective communication with your partners, because they're the ones that are going to allow your page to be successful. If they don't want their game on your page, then that's going to be a problem. And for the Guildford Games Festival, we're limited in what we could have. Your games had to be made in the Guildford area to participate. So nobody turned us down, which is good. But some events, particularly themed ones, will put out a call, for example, for you to participate in. They're normally very oversubscribed, and then they'll basically have a judging process where you'll either make it or you won't. I think being fair in your page setup is just really important, and Valve aren't silly. They'll have an eye to this sort of thing as well, even if they don't talk about it explicitly. So as I mentioned earlier, for me, other people might disagree, but for me, having the page arranged by user reviews made sense, and having those randomized as well was fair. As tempting as it was to shove my games right at the top of the page. And I think it's really important to make the pages easy to parse. I've seen pages that are just a wall of games. They're not subdivided up. And the one I'm particularly remembering is, wall of games, then a more button. You click that, the wall continues, another more button. Nothing was randomized. So if you, I think as well, it was like a physical event, it wasn't PAX, but it was something like that, that people would have paid to go and demo at the event. And then the bonus is you get on the page, which, the Steam page is going to provide many more wish lists than people visiting a physical booth would. But the person that went to that festival and their game was right at the bottom of the page, the impressions they would have got from the page would have been absolutely tiny. And I would be very disappointed / angry if I was in that position. So I think, if you're an event holder, you should do better. But also, I'm not a huge fan of carousels in event pages, particularly if they're not, the games within those aren't randomized, because again, the more barriers you're putting for people scrolling through your Steam page, you're just going to have your game seem less. So again, if I was at the end of a carousel that wasn't randomized, I'd be a bit passively aggressively angry. As I touched on earlier, I think the page art really matters, but also you want the capsule that's hopefully going to be on the front page to be something that draws the eye, so that people are clicking on it and visiting your page. So, I talked about the verticality aspect, I think, informing the impressions on the games further down the page. If you see Guildford Games Festival 2022 on Steam later this year, you can bet there'll be very, very vertical artwork in it. If you've got content that's specific for the event, like we had with the Guildford Games Festival, make sure that's ready. I'm very fortunate in that I just had to worry about the Steam side. There was other people making sure that the festival content was ready. But just things like, making sure you've got a backup machine, preferably in another location, just in case your internet goes down during the event. And also featuring, if you don't ask, you don't get, basically. Obviously, be polite, not too pushy. But yeah, handle it how you want to try and secure the featuring, because that, like I said, makes or breaks your event. And I think it's good practice just to check for featuring bugs. I've never received any featuring bugs until last year's Guildford Games Festival, where I had 2. The first was clicking on the capsule on the front page, just reloaded the front page of Steam. Somebody went, I was like, yeah, you do not know how I felt when that happened. Like, if I was wearing a heart monitor, I would not like to have seen the results. But frantic email to Valve, rectified very quickly, but I was still like, what did we miss out on? The second was slightly trickier because it was in the pop-up message, and clicking that went through to the wrong page. And that's those pop-up messages don't all happen at once. They get spread out to users over the course of the feature. And so I was logging out, logging in, various accounts where it finally popped up. So, phew, it's there, and clicked on it. Events are fantastic. That they are everywhere. So you've got to make sure that they're sort of top quality, I think, now to be featured. As with anything, there was a gold rush period which has ended, but you can still do them. And they're certainly worthwhile doing it. And if you just want to make sure you're participating in as many as possible. So there is time for some questions, but if you think of questions afterwards or whenever, I'm always happy to talk shop and pay it forward. So some details are there, and you can reach out to me whenever you like. But yeah, are there any questions?
Cheers, that was a really great talk. When you mentioned about having broadcasts and stuff, one of the issues we have is that I run the broadcast on my machine from OBS, and I have to turn my computer off at some point, especially with the price of energy at the minute. Do you have any tips or services that we can look into to keep them running 24/7 during an event?
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's a consideration we had, even on my own personal page. I just personally use a low power drawing laptop because it's just streaming a video, right? It doesn't need a monster of a machine. With the Guildford Games Festival, we had a local company that was handling that. So in terms of like online services, I'm afraid I don't know of any. If you do know, let me know. Oh, look.
Yeah, we use a program called EasyLive. It's quite expensive, but you upload it all to the server, and then it runs. Yeah, we use a program called easylive.io, and you upload all of it to a server, and then it just runs it can run for 24 hours before it has to get started again.
Okay.
But you can start it on your phone, stop it on your phone, because it all just uploads to the internet, and then you can turn your computer off and don't have to worry about your internet. And they've got really good customer service and stuff, so that's what we use.
Okay. Yeah,
it's
okay. Easy Live. So do you work for Easy Live? Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering, some events have the live broadcasting, and they have a schedule of little 1 hour slots as part of that. When you're setting this up, do you get to choose whether or not to include that, or is that something you have to ask Valve for separately?
Yeah, so we haven't used it on the Guildford Games Festival because we wanted it to just loop continuously over the weekend. But I've seen certainly lots of events that basically tune in at these times to watch these talks. I think that's just on the tools, on the broadcasting tools.
I asked because we had a game in a couple recently, and it was SimFest, I think, had these scheduled events, and you could just organize your own, choose 2 slots. Everyone got 2 slots. And during the slot,
was when the wish lists came.
Okay.
Like all of the visitors came to the page,
Yeah.
and there was like a build up before that, and you got this own like mini event within the event, and you could take
really
advantage of that as well.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense because you've got more eyes on you. Interestingly, with broadcasting, the official content I don't think ever appeared, even though it had the eyeballs on it, it never actually surfaced to the broadcast section of the front page, but the participating games footage would. So I think both Abandoned Ship and Gloomhaven were on the front page for a lot of the weekend just for the broadcast feature, which for anybody that's made it to that, impressions are ridiculous, but the click-through is absolutely tiny, so it sort of messes with your click-through rate a bit. But you know, everybody that sees your game and clicks on it is good, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really interesting. I wasn't aware of the fact that it would build up wish lists. The fact that you were on it.
It was a nice thing to plan around during the event.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
being in it, you have these 2 beats, and you could sort of relax in between.
And out of interest, was how did you feel like that particular? So was it the tabletop event?
That was SimFest.
A SimFest, yeah. Did you feel, because that was a Valve one, right?
No. Well, was it Valve?
Yeah,
it was, but it had an organizer as well. You always have a partner organizer. But after that, there was another one, and it was a bit disappointing that there was not that wasn't there. It seemed like an extra feature that was good for the developers, and we missed that. Yeah.
So one thing I noticed as well with those bigger events, particularly the Valve run ones, and I noticed this on the Going Rogue event, was that, but it happens on Next Fest as well, actually, that some of their most popular whatever sections, most velocity based on round wish lists. So I think for Century, we'd not long released the announcement trailer for it, and then the Going Rogue event happened immediately after. So I'd like to pretend that this was ingenious planning on my part, but it was entirely luck. But we ended up being really high on the, I think it was the popular upcoming games tab, purely because we'd gained lots of wish lists from our announcement trailer being out recently, which, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We had greater visibility, so we were gaining more wish lists, which meant we were staying up there higher, and such as any algorithmic platform and how it works.
Thanks.
Cool. Have we got a question here?
Hi, thanks, Gary. You mentioned sort of how you chose to kind of rank people for existing games based on reviews. How about upcoming games?
So
followers or something? Or?
Yes, no. So it was that's interesting. That could be a way to do it, but because there was only, I think, 2 upcoming games in the first year and 4 in the second year, because Guildford calls itself the Hollywood of games. I don't necessarily agree with that term, but it is what it is. But there's only so many games there, so it was enough for us just to
have a section and equal rank
and make it random, basically. I could read between the lines and go, well, 2 Point Campus is going to be more popular than Century. Who knows? But yeah, so so that should be ranked above. But it felt fine for that to be random. But followers, that data is exposed within Steam itself. Actually, is one of the rare numbers that is exposed. So yeah, that's a really good way of approaching it as well. Cool. I've got 1 minute left, but I don't know if there's any other questions. Finish a minute earlier then. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Thank you, Gary.